We're good, okay.
We're going. Yeah. Hey, friends, what's going on? It's Brett and Lori and Wynn and a few guest stars
Hey, Brett.
for this installment. Hey, you guys.
Hey, Lori. And, yeah, we dragged these guys out of the woodwork.
Yeah, go ahead. Introduce these fine people.
Well,
they're
oh my
they're
gosh.
your friends, man.
Yeah, we found them walking down the street, so we dragged them in because we needed some extra objective, what's the name?
Proboscis? Probosci?
Yeah.
Ohioan proboscis.
Ohioan, is it Ohioan?
We're
Ohioans.
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 So this is Doug and Sue from Ohio. They're great customers of ours and friends, and so they wanted to get involved. Well, we wanted them to get involved. I don't know if they wanted to get involved. So we brought them in, and we're actually going to have a good time talking about hops and doing some olfactory.
Sensory.
Sensory.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite things to do in the brewery. There's a lot of stuff that we do day to day in the brewery that becomes day to day stuff. But every once in a while, something like this comes along where we really get to dive in and do a deep dive. We're going to actually sample different varieties of hops to decide which ones we want to get to put in our beer later on this season. It's a super, super fun deep dive on hops.
So I'll jump in a little bit and talk about, and it's funny because I will take my dump truck that's loaded with spent grain and I'll take it over to our refuse recycling place, which is not like a quarter of a mile from here. And they have a big compost pile, and I'll dump it. If it doesn't go to a local farm, which feeds their cattle or their hogs, and I'll dump it, and somebody will come up and say, "Oh, is those all the hops from your beer?" And I'm going, "No, I can't believe they don't understand that that's not hops, that's grain." So what seems simple to us is not simple because people don't really realize what goes into making beer sometimes. So we actually source our hops from all over the world, but a lot of our primary hops that go into like Thirsty Botanist or 633 are grown and processed in the Northwest, so Oregon or Washington State. And we actually get to select, if we use enough hops, we get to select out of different crops of that year. And they come from different parts of those states, different valleys. It's a lot like wine.
So one of the hop farms that we use is Crosby. So does Crosby source from many different farms
do.
in that area?
They do.
So that's why you get different lots, different.
Yep.
So like if we're sampling, like I've got El Dorado over here.
Mhm.
So this batch of El Dorado came from probably a different hop farm than this batch. Is that?
Sure, yeah, and exactly, and it's like, it's a cooperative out there, so you have a lot of different farmers, and probably Ohio has the same thing, where they'll grow, whether they're growing corn or soybean or whatever, they'll have individual farms that will be either a member of a co-op that will sell their goods, their product to a main buyer, and then that buyer will either process it or move it on to the next person in the chain. So same thing here, and even in those individual farms, there'll be farms that have hops on a north-facing hill or a south-facing hill or down in the valley or a little bit higher up, and it's just like grapes. It's very about the terroir. It's about where it is.
Temperamental about climate and
Sure. And that's why, even though beer, a lot of people think that craft beer, especially, it should be exactly the same every year, and we all strive to have it being consistent. We're still getting products just like the vineyards are getting grapes, and every year can be extremely different.
Remember the year it was so smoky?
So
the
smoky,
fires?
yeah, they had a lot of fires out in Oregon, up in the Northwest, and so we actually had some, Brian.
Brian, we need you to come too.
You're up, buddy, perfect timing. Yeah.
We're gonna get Brian, our brewer, in on this.
So, yeah,
Hey, slide in here.
Yeah, come on in,
Brian
so.
does too.
Brian.
Yeah, Doug, Sue, yeah.
Okay.
Look at the noses we have.
Yeah.
I mean, noses we have.
We're not gonna get it wrong this time.
So it's just like grapes, and so every year they had in the Northwest they had a lot of fires in Oregon and Idaho, and it actually caused. You would think like you'd have. Well, let me back up a little bit. Hops grow on a vine, and they grow up quite high. They put them up on high trellises with tall telephone poles with wires, and they grow up high, and they'll do some pruning during the year, but they flower, and you can put this on the screen because I don't have the flower. They come to a cone, and they're rich in oils, and that's where we get our aromas and our flavors and our bitterness out of our hops. But that's the actual flower, that we use to put in our beer to balance the sweetness of the malts and give it flavor and aroma. So that's what hops are for. And so what happened with the fires was that the smoke, you'd think it would cause a smoke, almost a smoke flavor, you know, in like it caused that in wines with grapes. But it didn't with us. It actually caused some of them. You could actually almost take like an ashy flavor, very slight, but and it did make a huge difference in our beer from one year to the next. And we had to struggle. We struggled with that as far as trying to bring some of those Northwestern hops out of our beer and adding another hop that came from a different region in to try to bring back that fruity, floral aroma that we like in our beer.
And that's where we get the name artisanal craft ale.
Right. So
That's the craft part of
yeah,
craft beer.
and I mean, we all love to have things exactly the same, and we strive for that. But don't be afraid if you pick up the beer and say, "Well, this doesn't taste like it used to be." It may not taste exactly the way. You're really good at that if you can sense the difference, but embrace it because you know it's like that's just like a bottle of wine. Some vintages are different than others, or all of them are. So it's fun to experience that. So we have two different varietals of hops in front of us today. One of them is Idaho 7, not Ohio 7, but Idaho 7, and which is one of our favorite hops. It was a varietal that was created by a farm out in Idaho. And the other ones, what do you got?
I got Eldorado.
Eldorado. And so this year, they usually send us like the whole leaf hops, which he's going to show a picture of on the screen, but and that's usually in the fall. We get to smell them before they ever process them into pellets, and we get to try them and choose out of those varietals and those lots, and we get to choose those. We didn't do that this year. We actually are to the point where they've already pelletized the hops, and we're going to sniff these over with our
highly trained olfactory senses.
And while everybody is kind of smelling these now, these are two different lots of the same varietal. It'll be interesting to see if you guys can sense the difference between the two. So while they're doing this,
Taking my hands and rub like we do the same way? Or?
I would maybe lightly and just get an idea of what it
You can
smells
put it
like.
in your hand, but some
They're
people
very
are
oily.
sensitive to,
Yeah.
you might.
Yeah, if you're picking, and we have some people that, we handed out some little baby hop rhizomes a few years ago now. We called it the hop swap.
Right.
And they were growing hops, a varietal hops that we use in our 633.
Use your other hand.
And when you pick them in the fall, they actually can make you itch a little bit. So they take the flower that looks like a spruce cone, and they'll mill it up and press it into pellets. And this is the best way that we can get it to use, and almost all breweries like us use pelletized hops. Yeah.
Does the oils become more concentrated by doing pellets, or why do they do the pellets?
Well,
How is that invented?
it's easier to measure as far as volume into a certain amount of beer, but it's also easier to store. So they'll grind them up, they'll press them into pellets like you would a wood pellet, but they also vacuum pack them in nitrogen. They take the oxygen right out of these, and they'll keep really well. They'll keep for years. Obviously, we use them. We try to get the next years. We stay very current in our hops because we want them super fresh. But it's okay if the hops have been around a year or so. If they're in a oxygen removed package as pellets, they last really, really well. Keep them in the freezer.
Smell the Idahos?
Are the hops the ingredient that gives beer most of its flavor?
No, not necessarily. I mean, obviously, Thirsty Botanist is hop forward, super. I mean, we have a lot of hops in this. But the grain behind it, or the malt, which is malted barley, which we have some here, that is the base of your beer. So you start with water. That's your 99% or 95% of the ingredients in beer is water. Has to be great quality water. Has to have the right mineral contents for it to, even the yeast prefers a certain makeup of water. We make our mash, we rinse out the grains. If you come do a tour with Brett, he'll tell you all this, and Brian will help as far as how the process is. And then we take that, what we call wort, or our sweet water, and we put it into our boil, and then we add our hops to bitter, or to balance that wort. And so depending on what you put in for a base malt, some of those malts can have real strong sweetness, and even after fermentation, after the yeast eats all the sugars, it still leaves residual sugars and gives it a lot of great flavor. And so the trick in making a great beer is balance and trying to balance it out.
I mean, it's
And even a
basically
super-
like using spices in cooking.
Absolutely,
That's-
very much
that's-
so.
That's exactly what it
Yeah,
is.
you can change a dish by just adding salt to it, literally. But I mean, it's not that simple, but it is very much something like that. So yeah. So let's see.
So I smelled both of the Eldorados, and I couldn't detect much difference in those at all.
Yeah.
These,
Difference between El Dorado and Idaho?
not a lot. To me, the Eldorados smelled maybe a little sweeter, a little citrusier.
You know which one's which now?
Yes, we do.
I don't know those
Yeah.
on there. Which one goes where?
Oh, pretty sure the lesser. I left some in the bag here, so we know that.
Mm,
I just pick up kind of bubblegummy from El Dorado.
yeah, bubblegum.
Idaho 7, I got a little cracker from that.
Cracker.
Cracker.
I
What'd you guys get?
a little bit more spicy, a little bit more, but
Very strong.
Definitely
I
strong.
can't describe
That's
it.
strong.
Yeah.
I know, I can't describe it.
yeah.
They all smell like weed to
Stronger.
me.
Yeah. Why is
Well,
that,
let's bring
Brett?
that, it's a cousin,
So
so
that-
hops
they're-
is a
they're
cousin.
related,
That's right,
yeah, no,
that's right, yeah, yeah, here we
Well,
go.
what I
That's why he likes brewing so
Am I
much.
crazy? And I don't know.
So, you know, Brett, do you go, when you go into the local wheat shop, do they do a local tasting, a little smelling of?
It's the same deal. You can.
Yeah.
They've got when you if you choose to go, if you choose to visit any of the cannabis purveyors for recreational purposes here in Maine, for those 21 and older only, of course, a lot of the places have little small canisters with samples with a little vent in the top where you can actually do this. It's the terpenes. You have to look up what terpenes are, but terpenes are different types of chemicals that give plants and hops and things like this their aromas. Limonene is one of the ones that gives like a citrusy flavor. There's pinene that has a pine one. There are earthy ones. There are ones that kind of are gassy smelling, but they all kind of combine to give aromas, whether it's weed or whether it's hops or anything like that. But those are the kinds of things that
We're geeking out on
I know
science.
this is
now.
awesome.
Totally. And, yeah, and so, yeah, and that's the thing, like some of the hops, like Columbus, some of the bigger, like the older varieties of, I shouldn't say older, but the ones that I started with 10, 15 years ago, there's so many more varietals that are coming out that are getting a lot more fruit and a lot more, you know, papaya and all the different fruit flavors. Previous, there was hops that were really strong in like garlic and onion and actually in a good way, not like, oh my God, I'm not gonna have a garlic beer, but really, they did have that, a lot of that compounds that would give you that flavor and aroma.
Do you have a favorite hop?
I don't know as I do. I mean, I find that at least in the beers that we've kind of designed and made, it's not one hop. It's like
Combo.
adding a combo to try to get all those favorites of each one of those hops
Hop
into the
blending.
beer, and then all of a sudden now you've got your
We-
earthies, you've got your fruities, you've got all that kind of blend.
We
in.
did a single hop beer, the Rod Run Rebel. We did a single hop. What was the hop that we used for that one? I can't remember.
Strata.
Strata.
It was Strata, yeah, and that's another varietal that just came out.
That's a newer hop, right? That's a
Yeah,
newer variety?
Yeah, yeah.
They're all been cross-pollinated to have those fruit melony flavors.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of them are doing single hop IPAs that are just fabulous because they've gotten these varietals that can bring it all.
handle the workload all by themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Is that the hazy part of a hazy IPA, does that come from the hop?
So it does, but
Good
it comes.
question.
It's a good question,
Yeah.
and it comes not only from the hop but from the yeast. So yeast strains, depending on how they flocculate out, that sounds kind of fun, doesn't it?
That is fun to say.
That's another video right there. We can have a flocculate video. But no, so some yeast will just drop right out and leave your beer like lagers. Like you can hold that one up there. It's nice and bright, and so there's very little yeast left in it.
Very bright.
But there's others that will tend not to drop out, and those yeast tend to collect some of the hop flavors and compounds in them and keep it in that beer, so you end up with these hazy beers. And it was a thing, and I'll talk about one of my favorite breweries, Tributary. And you used to work, did you work for Tributary? You worked for Todd
Yeah, at Portsmouth Brewery.
at Portsmouth Brewing, but
Pre-tributary.
Pre-Tributary, yeah. And so he was great in a way that he was talking about for the last 30 years, he's been in the brewing industry forever, you know, such a great, for the last 30-some years, I've worked my ass off to make a beautiful, clear beer, and these guys come along and just make this stuff, and everybody loves it. And it's funny how it's changed, you know?
Yeah.
So it used to be everybody stuck their nose up to a cloudy beer. Thought there was something wrong with it. Now it's the thing, you know? But it's just so much more full of flavor. And not that a clear beer isn't full of flavor, it's just the way these trends have come around, you know, these hazy beers. So yeast, the amount of hops is big. I mean, we're putting more hops in one batch of beer than they did in old beers for the whole year.
I mean, it's also that, it's also proteins.
Yep.
There's a lot of wheat and a lot of oats in there,
Yep.
which you can't make that clear.
What percentage of a batch would be hops and other grains? I mean, are the hops like?
So hops are not grains, right? Hops are a
Like,
spice.
you gotta think of it like the spices, yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay,
so if you were making
Very small amount.
yeah, you make a
Small
lasagna and you put oregano on it. That's the thing. The
Okay.
oregano's the hops. The lasagna, you got a lot of other things going in. So grain is your big. You know, we like in a how many pounds in a 10-barrel batch of grain? You know, ballpark 700 pounds.
Yeah, 7 to 8.
Yeah, 700 to 800 pounds of grain
Okay.
into 10 barrels, which is 310 gallons worth of beer. And then the hops at the end in a 10-barrel batch is
About 90.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, a lot of hops.
Which-
and that's a ton of hops.
It's a lot.
And that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a lot. It's more than 10%, which is
About
great.
about 5 pounds per
5
barrel.
pounds per barrel, yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, which is crazy. And there's other ways to probably reduce the amount of hops you put into your beer by using hop oils, and there's a whole other industry out there to try to get those flavors and
This
aromas in the beer.
cryogenics,
Yeah, they're
which
making
is
hot pellets.
which is pellets that they basically filter out all the plant part, and it's only supposed to be the lupulins and the.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as oily or sticky as these are T90 hops. If you get the cryogenic hops, they've been reduced down in vegetable matter, and you end up with so much more hop oils, and they are just crazy. Use half as many, and so that helps us if we do use that in the return of the beer. We don't lose as much beer in losses of trub. You lose a fair amount of beer when you put that much hops in it. Because it just-
Trub is the waste. That's the
it's
runoff,
waste.
the extra
It's
stuff.
It's the thick, chewy stuff at the bottom.
The stuff you don't want.
Yeah. Well, that
What do
was
you do with the true?
the trub is organic matter that will go right into. Well, a lot of it we flush down, and we have a way to separate out our waste, and so that goes away. And used for bioenergy. Actually, they use it down at a energy making plant in Rockland. Our grain. 90% of it, Brian's worked really hard to get local farmers. We have some great ones that come bring their trucks, and we load them up with the spent grain, which is grain that has been malted and steeped, and that's just the waste of making our sweet water, and that goes in the dump truck, and that goes to them to feed their cattle or hogs, right? What's
Both.
Malcolm?
All
Malcolm's
livestock.
basically
Malcolm's got cows.
cows, yep. And there's another hog farmer that's getting a bunch.
Yep, he's got the pigs.
Yep, yep.
And you can bring it to your kitchen
That's-
and make great breads.
That's one of the best things. One of the best things when the farmers come and get our spent grain, because we're helping them out a lot too, because feed costs for farmers is crazy as well. So if we can help them by doing this, everybody wins. That way, you know, our waste is going to good use, and we're helping those guys save a little too.
She cut his feed bill 80%.
80%.
80%.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's
If
really
only, if only I
important.
could cut my feed bill by 80%.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's really important in the spring and the fall because the critters aren't grazing as much in that time of year, so they're hungry, and we're able to give them this when they need it. So that's really good.
It's gotta make the meat taste better also.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It doesn't make it taste hoppy. Somebody said, "Oh, am I going to have a New York strip with a little IPA flavor?" No, that's
Hazy
before the
ribeyes.
house. Yeah, that's before the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a fun episode. This is
It
great.
is,
Yes,
it is.
yes.
That's something else I was going to mention. It was something like with the farmers, and we get every now and then they'll bring us some pork chops. That's always good.
Hey, get the aroma pork chop.
Yeah,
Cool.
oh,
Yeah.
they're really good.
And we've made.
I'll make that happen more.
You should.
Yeah.
You gotta work on that.
Yeah, let's do that. We
Yeah,
made
good
dog
job.
biscuits.
You make dog biscuits.
Dog
We
biscuits?
don't have a dog anymore.
Not anymore,
We
but
used to snort them down.
for all you people that do have dogs, spent grain, dog biscuits,
Yeah.
some peanut butter,
Yep.
they love it.
Yeah, every now and then I'll take a half a dump truck load if Malcolm doesn't take it all, and I'll dump it over by my house, and the turkeys love it. And, it's kind of fun just to see them more for wildlife than anything.
Yeah.
But and if worst case scenario, we take it over here to our refuse, it goes on the compost pile, and it really gets that started, because it's 150, 160 degrees when it comes out of our mash tun, and so that's already starting to grow things before it even thinks about it. So, yeah, it's really good for getting your
Great.
compost going. Yep.
Well, this will be part of our tours and tastings.
Absolutely, we're going to talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
all of this
That.
stuff through the coming months. When you join us on the tours or for the tastings and stuff, this is all stuff that we're going to talk about again. So
Yeah. And this could be you, because if you're walking down Spine Road, hey, why don't you come in here and have a beer and sniff some hops?
you could get tapped. It could happen.
Great pun.
See what I did there?
Yeah, see?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Like and subscribe, you guys. Watch for another episode coming soon. Doug and Sue, cheers, you guys. Thanks for
Cheers.
being
Thanks for
on.
being here.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Oh.